Hi, everyone. My name is Arawa. I am here with QuickTake, and today is Black Women's Equal Pay Day. It's also Black National Business Month, and it's a great overlap. We are joined by a very special guest. But before we get started, in case you don't know what Black Women's Equal Pay Day is, it is the day that essentially marks the time it takes on average for Black women to earn as much as their white male counterparts in the workplace for 2019. So for Black women on average, that is 226 extra days of work. Now, we're joined today by Minda Harts. She is a best-selling author of The Memo. She is also a professor and an entrepreneur, and she has more than this world's experience in negotiating her worth and getting what is hers when it comes to equal pay. So thank you so much for joining us today, Minda.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here to have this important conversation.
Very important. We appreciate your time. So we just want to hop right in. Black Women's Equal Pay Day has really been picking up steam on social media and just like in general conversations over the past couple of years. What is the buzz and why is this holiday so important?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when there wasn't a highlight for Black women in our equal pay day, and so even though this is not a celebratory time, it is a time for awareness. And so I want to really highlight that there are pay inequities even within women as it pertains to women. So white women make around 80 cents, and Asian women make around 90 cents on the dollar to a white man, and then Black women 62 cents. And you think about we're there, but then trans women, Latinx women, and indigenous women, they make even less. So it's really important that we talk about the disparities even within women.
Right. So tell us about your experience with equal pay and how you've been able to kind of combat the inequities.
One of the things is educating myself and talking with other women. And so I know growing up, sometimes in a Black family, we have been told, don't tell anybody your business, don't talk about money. And sometimes we have to talk to people about money, people that you trust or people that you know, so that you can get the most information. So for example, I remember hearing, I was at an event and I heard a woman say, oh, women make 79 cents on a dollar. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I went to further investigate, and then I realized that Black women weren't making that. And so I would have never known that had
Right.
others not been talking about what they make. And so even now as an entrepreneur and a public speaker, there are times when I have to talk with other women and say, hey, I know that you spoke here 2 weeks ago. What did they offer you? Right. And I've been in a situation where I've been offered one amount, and another woman who happens to be white, we talk and we have a conversation, and I find out that she got paid 3 times more than I did to do, we're both authors. And so it's one of those things that once you gather the information, you got to advocate for yourself.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about where do these inequities stem from? Like, what is the logic behind it? Because there has been reports about how Black women are the most educated racial group in the country, with the most amount of undergraduate and post-secondary degrees. And I'm just wondering, where does that discrepancy stem from? We're super educated, yet we're underpaid. Why is that?
Yeah, well, it's a systemic issue. One of the things, it's also an opportunity gap. I think it makes no sense that Black women are one of the most educated groups in the country. And yet when you look at the C-suite in most corporations or nonprofit, we represent 1% of the C-suite. And so we're doing everything that we've been told gets us ahead, right? And yet, so we really need our allies and our leaders to lean into their courage and provide opportunities so that we can have our seat at the table. And it's the reason why I wrote the memo, because we talk about women in the workplace, but we don't always focus on the differences. So Black women experience the workplace different than other women. And so we have to shine the light on the facts so that we can find solutions. And I'm really excited about this opportunity to, a lot of companies are making commitments to Black employees right now. And I think one of the ways they can help us solve this problem is by doing a pay audit and being transparent about their pay, similar to companies like Salesforce. Be transparent, and then we can talk about solutions.
Definitely. So in terms of solutions, I know you mentioned in your book that it's really, and you just kind of touched on it now, but it's really important to share salaries amongst women? Like, what are the actual benefits and how can that like amount to some sort of change?
Yeah, I think it's really important because if we're operating in a silo, you're never going to know what's possible for you, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe you can encourage another woman. And I think that we really have to talk about it out loud and even in our friend circles so that we can understand what we might be missing out on. And so part of the equation that I talk about is, yes, as women, we can ask for more, right? So what's the part of the equation that we can solve? That's making sure that if we need a negotiation coach, we hire one, right? We look at our state's equal pay laws, right? Making sure that we have all of the necessary information in our toolkit. But on the other side, we have to ask. You know, it does show that sometimes we're just not asking, and that's not the whole problem. But you know, we can't close the gap if we don't ask. And also too, the other part of it is if your company is not valuing you in pay, then you also have to strategize, well, maybe this isn't the right table for me. So I think as women of color, as Black women, we have so much power and we just have to flex that. But then also we have to have companies that are invested in our success.
So let's say, hypothetically, I have a conversation with some friends and I find out that I'm making a lot less. Like what are the do's and don'ts? Like, how do you move forward in that situation without, you know, potentially risking your financial stability?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I'm not saying, you know, bust in your, you know, manager's virtual door and say, you know, you better have my money right now. You know, that's not the way to go about it. I would say definitely through strategy. I have a whole chapter dedicated to negotiation and strategy. But one of the things that we can do, again, if you don't feel comfortable negotiating, then practice role play. You know, so while you're asking one of your friends at brunch, you know, what are you making? You know, say, hey, would you role play with me? I want to discuss various scenarios that could be the potential outcome, right? So if my manager says no, what do? You don't just say okay and walk away, but say, well, what would make it a yes? You know, what do I need to do in the next 3 to 6 months to make that possible, right? And so I think that we need to also don't just put it out there, but also make sure that you're getting the answers that you need. But additionally, I think we have to keep having these conversations because, again, we would never know that Asian women were making 90 cents on a dollar if we weren't talking about it, right? And so we have to get comfortable and be vulnerable with people that you trust. And again, even in my own life recently, I've had to talk about my salary with other women so that I got the information that I needed, right? And in that situation, I just want to tell you, it can be stressful, right? It can be scary, but we need to lean into our courage because we will never benefit when we're cautious.
Nice. And when it comes to that, I'm wondering, we are in the middle of, you know, one of the worst pandemics we've had in a century. And we know that Black women tend to be breadwinners for their families. How is the pay gap kind of hindering the ability to build wealth and kind of curb intergenerational struggles?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up because, I mean, that's a huge pain point for us because, you know, we're making those 62 cents on a dollar and that's on the high end, right? You know, for some people aren't even making that as Black women. And so we have to be mindful of that. But then many of us, because we are the first person in our family to graduate from college, we hold the brunt of making sure that everyone else is doing okay, right? So maybe now we have relatives that, you know, are experiencing layoffs or furloughs. So we're the ones that people look to help out. And so it's very hard for us to build generational wealth when we're stretched thin. And then the other part of that is when we don't have the opportunities to sit in the executive suite and when we don't get our pay, then that also impedes upon our chances to have board seats, right? And so that's another, if you're not in the C-suite, then that might not look at you as a viable candidate to have a board seat on a publicly traded board. And so that's another layer of closing the wealth gap. And so we're missing out on a lot of opportunities to build wealth because we don't have the opportunity and the access. And so I really would say that this is where our leaders and our managers really need to think about the role that they play in this because we're doing all the things that we're supposed to do, right? And so there's still a disconnect and it takes two to make a thing go right. Okay, so it's really right. Negotiation happens on both sides.
Definitely. And speaking of negotiations, we have a really good question from the audience. Is there a difference between negotiating advice for women, Black women of different ages, from, maybe early 40s to early 20s? Is there a different way to kind of go about that strategy-wise?
Yeah, I think some of the tools that we need in our toolkit, I know for me, when I was in a corporate environment, the one thing that really helped me when I was younger and when I was a little more seasoned was getting a coach, getting a career coach. And they really helped me hone in on how to tell my career story, and not just I want more money, but how do I articulate that story and base it upon what the company's bottom line is, as well as my personal career goals. And so once you learn how to tell your career story, and then also once you had some conversations with other people to see what the range is, then you have some room to negotiate. And I also want to say that negotiation isn't just about money, but it's also those fringe benefits too. I've seen people negotiate working from home, right? I've seen people have professional development stipends. I've seen people negotiate career coaches. And so dream a little bit bigger as women, and see, and don't count yourself out because you feel maybe I'm too old or too young. We need to close this gap, and it's going to take all hands on deck.
Definitely. So in your book, you mentioned that if there's anything anyone should take away, it's just knowing your sense of worth, sense of self. And I'm just wondering if you can kind of define what that should look like when it comes to the career landscape.
Yeah, I think as Black women in particular, it can be tough because we don't often see ourselves at the highest levels of leadership, right? And so we're working very hard, we're asking for these things. And, some of our environments would say that we're not ready, or the narrative would be that, just wait your turn. And that can really cause us to, if we don't have a strong sense of self, it could really dictate the things that we go after, right? Or the way we might shrink ourselves. And so I think it's really important to, one of my favorite quotes, and every time I get a chance to say it, I will, it's by Audre Lorde. And she says, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. And once we hone into that, we just have to go after it. We have to go for it. And so I definitely want to encourage, all Black women to ask for more, essentially, and again, I know it can be tough, but it's one of those things where if we don't do it, who else will, right? And you got to know that you deserve more than enough. You are more than enough. You worked really hard to get here. So none of this is charity. This is your right to have equal pay for equal work. And I just want to, remind you to be involved in different groups, surround yourself with a network that can also encourage you on those moments where you feel like, I just don't know if I can keep moving, right? Or I just don't know if I can ask. And so just remind yourself, I tell myself a new story every day, and it's, I belong in every room I enter, but not every room deserves to have me in it, right? And so we have to take back that narrative, even if some of these, companies and institutions would say otherwise.
That brings up a really good point that I've noticed in my friend circles and just other colleagues. It's like, we know that companies for the most part are about their bottom line, what's going to work best for them. Why do you think is that Black women and other women of color tend to have these emotional entanglements when it comes to negotiating the salary? Why are we so prone to lowballing ourselves?
Yeah, I love that you use the word entanglement, because I think that many of us are really in these workplace entanglements. And I think that as women, as Black women, we've been loyal to a fault, right? Because we've been taught, just go in, work hard, keep your head down. If you work hard, you're going to get the thing, right? And what we realize is there's a system in place that doesn't always reward those who work the hardest. And so I think because we've been conditioned to think that's how it works, that this is a meritocracy. So it's hard to unlearn those things, right? And so we really have to lean into that courage and ask for what we want. And it's small acts of courage, right? I can talk to you about this now, but it took a lot to get to this point, right? And I still have to self-talk and have a growth mindset to say, even when I say, wow, am I asking for too much? There is no too much, because the one thing I want to stress is there's a range for a reason, right? There's a range for a reason. And most companies are going to expect for you to negotiate in some way, shape, or form, right? So when you negotiate, then they're like, oh, well, good. So lean into it and do it not just for you, but do it for the next generation of women of color, because the more we ask, we can close that gap for them.
Wow. That's actually a really good point. I never realized that the range was there for that reason, for negotiating. That's really good feedback. Another really good audience question, if you're familiar, how does the US rank against other countries in paying Black women?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but I imagine, I mean, from some of the women that have read the memo and I hear from, they say that, hey, we experience the same inequalities, in the UK and London and South Africa. And so I think globally, this is an opportunity for us to rise up together and say, we're not giving companies, we're not giving anyone pass to pay us unfairly, right? And so when we talk about psychological safety, part of psychological safety is being able to get paid fairly, right? Doing work and getting paid comparably. And so I think that if we want to create that for Black women in the workplace, then we need to look at the salaries.
Right. So if a woman, say, has been in a company for 2.5, 3 years, been busting their butt to, bend over backwards, as you said, it's not always about how hard you work. I think it's a thing of like us learning to work smarter. But let's say we've been working really hard for a long time, and then it comes to a point where you ask for a raise and you don't get it. What should you consider before potentially walking away? Like, what other things can you do in that role if you really love it before you say, I've given it my entirety and now I have to go?
That's a great question. I think that part of that is before you even go into the negotiation, you need to draw your lines in the sand, right? You have to practice what are a few different scenarios. If it's a yes, great. But if it's a no, then okay, not right now, then when, right? So don't play with those scenarios or write it down, whatever works best for you. But then understand what you're willing to say yes to and no to. Because oftentimes I think as women, as Black women, we center everybody else in the workplace. And remember that we can also center ourselves, and we have careers and we have goals and we have dreams. So we have to make sure that we're positioning ourselves in the right way. And so the last thing that I'll say is it's really important to push back a little bit, right? So again, if it's a no, then okay, it's not right now, but can we revisit this conversation in 3 months? What do I need to do to get it to a yes? And the other thing too is, even if you don't get a yes, don't be discouraged, because this is good information. Because if you've been somewhere for 2 years, they may not value you in the way that you need them to. And so then you have some more information to say, hey, do I want to stay here or do I want to strategize my next move? And so we have more power than we think. So we've all heard no, but even with the memo, I heard no from 4 publishers, but 1 said yes. Right. And so it's one of those things where, if not here, then where? But don't you stop asking. Don't you stop pushing.
Right. And I'll end with this question. How could America and just the economy benefit from paying women of all colors, but especially Black women, because it's Black Women's Equal Pay Day? How could they benefit from just paying women what they're owed, or equally?
Yeah. I think we just overall psychologically safe environment for everyone to thrive at work. You would never tell the marketing department, go and do that campaign and pay them half to get it done, right? It would just be absurd for you to think that they can pull this off without having some investment. And so I really want to push back and say, companies, show Black women how you want to be invested in their success. And you may not be able to hire, 50 Black women tomorrow and put them in the C-suite, but you can start paying them fairly.
Yeah. Well, I've learned so much. I really appreciate this. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we hop on?
Keep asking. Even when it hurts, keep asking.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Minda. I'm hoping that the next time we talk, it's about how everyone is getting paid equally. And keep on doing the good work.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.